The city was a symphony of rain that night, a relentless drumming on rooftops and pavement that turned streetlights into hazy golden orbs. For yeah, it was a nuisance. She clutched the large, flat package wrapped in brown paper to her chest, trying to shield her finished painting from the downpour. Her umbrella was doing little against the wind-whipped sheets of water, and the bus stop felt a million miles away. She knew this part of the city wasn't the best, but the shortcut through the narrow, cobblestoned alley known as Marble Lane would shave 20 minutes off her trip home. Taking a deep breath, she turned into its dim, cramped mouth. The air in the alley was different. It was quieter, the rain's noise muffled by the close walls, and it felt heavy, charged with something more than just the storm. About halfway down she saw them. A group of men, their dark silhouettes blocking the way. Her steps faltered. Her first instinct was to turn back, but the thought of the long, cold walk around made her hesitate. She decided to just keep her head down and hurry past. As she got closer, the scene became clearer. One man was standing apart from the others, and the way he held himself, utterly still, with a quiet intensity, made it clear he was the one in charge. This was Il-sung. His voice, low and calm, was laced with a threat so sharp it could cut glass. He was speaking to another man who was trembling, his shoulders hunched against the rain and the fear. The other men, Il-sungs, stood like statues, their faces hard, creating a wall of silent intimidation. Ya tried to slip by, pressing herself against the damp brick wall. But fate, or perhaps the slick cobblestones, had other plans. The corner of her painting caught on a jutting piece of metal, snagging the paper and spinning her slightly off balance. The ripping sound was like a gunshot in the tense silence. Every single head turned towards her. One of Il-sung's men immediately stepped in front of her, his face a mask of cold warning. "Get lost," he grunted, his voice leaving no room for argument. But Ya's heart was pounding for a different reason now. It wasn't just fear for herself. Her painting, the one she had spent weeks on, a vibrant explosion of sunflowers and a blue sky, was torn. A flash of hot anger mixed with her fear. She looked past the man in front of her, her eyes landing directly on Il-sung. He was watching her, his expression unreadable, his dark eyes taking in every detail. Her drenched clothes, her determined face, the damaged painting she held so protectively. Instead of running, she stood her ground. "You made me ruin my painting," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her hands were shaking. A few of the men scoffed, but Il-sung raised a single hand, and the alley fell silent again, save for the pattering rain. He took a step towards her, and the other man he was dealing with used the distraction to scurry away into the shadows, forgotten. Il-sung's full attention was now on Ya. He moved closer, not with a threat, but with a slow, curious intensity. He was close enough now that she could see the fine droplets of rain caught in his dark hair, the sharp line of his jaw, and the surprising depth of his eyes. They weren't cold, she realized. They were tired. Deeply, profoundly tired. He didn't look at his men or the painting. He looked only at her. "You are not afraid," he stated, his voice quieter now, a rough whisper. Yeah, her courage fueled by a strange mix of adrenaline and a sudden, unexplainable feeling of pity for this powerful, lonely-looking man, shook her head. "I am," she admitted. "But you look sad, not angry." The words hung in the wet air. Il-sung felt them land in his chest with a physical weight. No one, not in his entire adult life, had ever looked at him and seen sadness. They saw power, fear, respect, or hatred. Never sadness. His carefully built exterior, the wall he maintained every minute of every day, developed a hairline crack. He watched her shiver, a violent tremble that ran through her whole body, and the instinct to protect her was so sudden and so strong it overwhelmed every other thought. Without a word, he shrugged out of his own coat. It was impeccably tailored, expensive and perfectly dry on the inside. He moved slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and then he draped it over her shoulders. The weight of it was immense, and the residual warmth from his body seeped into her chilled skin. It smelled faintly of sandalwood and the rain. "June," Il-sung said, not taking his eyes off Ya. "Drive her home. Make sure she and her painting get there safely." The man who had tried to block her path, June, simply nodded, all the aggression gone from his face, replaced by pure obedience. As June gently guided her towards a sleek black car that had appeared at the end of the alley, Ya looked back over her shoulder. Il-sung was still standing in the rain, watching her go, his white shirt now plastered to his skin, completely exposed to the storm. She gave him one last, small smile, a silent thank you that held a universe of unspoken questions. Later, in her warm, small apartment, Ya unwrapped the ruined painting. The tear went right through the center of a bright yellow sunflower. She traced the rip with her finger, not with disappointment, but with a strange sense of wonder. The image of the man in the rain, his tired eyes and his unexpected kindness, was burned into her mind more vividly than any painting she could ever create. Back in his own spacious but empty apartment, Il-sung stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city lights blur through the wet glass. He replayed the encounter in his mind over and over. The bravery in her eyes, the directness of her words, the way she cared more about a damaged picture than the dangerous situation she was in. He looked down at his hands, hands that had dealt with so much violence and conflict, and remembered the gentle weight of his coat on her shoulders. For the first time in a very, very long time, the silence around him didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like anticipation. He didn't know her name, but he knew with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he needed to find her again. The days following the rainy alley encounter settled over Il-sung with a strange new weight. The city returned to its dry, bustling self, but his world felt permanently off-kilter. The sharp, ordered lines of his life had been blurred by the memory of a drenched woman and her damaged painting. He found himself distracted during meetings, his gaze drifting towards the window, not seeing the skyline but instead seeing the determined set of her jaw as she declared him sad. It was an observation that felt less like an insult and more like a key, turning a lock deep inside him he had forgotten existed. He had to see her again. Not as the intimidating figure in an alley, but as himself or whatever was left of that person. The search was easier than he anticipated. His resources were vast, and the clue of the painting was a solid one. June, the man who had driven her home, provided the neighborhood. A few discreet inquiries about local artists led to a small, sunlit art gallery nestled on a quiet, tree-lined street. It was called The Gilded Brush. When Il-sung saw the name, a faint, almost foreign smile touched his lips. It suited her. He waited for a day when the sun was bright, choosing to wear simple, elegant clothes, a soft gray sweater and dark trousers, hoping to appear less like the man from the alley and more like a man who might simply appreciate art. Pushing the gallery door open triggered a soft chime. The air inside was warm and smelled of linseed oil and coffee. And there she was. Ya was standing on a small step stool, carefully hanging a new canvas on a far wall. She was focused on her task, her brow furrowed in concentration. Il-sung's breath caught. In the calm daylight he could truly see her. She wore a simple yellow dress, and the sunlight from the large front window set her skin aglow. She looked like one of the vibrant, joyful subjects from her own paintings. He didn't speak at first, allowing himself to simply watch her work. He let his eyes wander over the gallery walls. The paintings were a symphony of color and life. There were fields of wildflowers, bustling market scenes full of laughing people, and serene portraits of elderly individuals whose eyes sparkled with wisdom and kindness. There was no darkness here, no shadows, only an unabashed celebration of the good in the world. It was a world away from his own. Ya, finally securing the painting, turned and noticed him. Her body went still for a fraction of a second, a flicker of surprise in her warm brown eyes. It wasn't fear, he noted with relief, but a cautious recognition. She stepped down from the stool, smoothing her dress. "You," she said softly, her voice a melody in the quiet room. "The man from the rain." "Il-sung," he offered, his own voice quieter, gentler than he usually allowed it to be in public. "My name is Il-sung." "Yeah," she replied. She gestured around them. "And this is my world." "It's beautiful," he said, and the words felt utterly inadequate. He wasn't just talking about the art. He was talking about the peace, the light, the very essence of the space she had created. He began to walk slowly around the room, and Ya, after a moment's hesitation, joined him. He asked thoughtful questions. Why sunflowers? He learned they represented adoration and loyalty, always seeking the sun. He pointed to a painting of an old man mending a shoe and asked about his story. Ya explained he was her grandfather, the man who taught her that fixing something was an act of love. Il-sung listened, truly listened, not as a tactic or a strategy, but because he was genuinely captivated. He was learning a new language, the language of her heart, and he found he desperately wanted to understand it. This became their new routine. Il-sung would visit the gallery in the late afternoons when the crowds had thinned. Their conversation started within the safe walls of the gallery but soon spilled out. They began taking walks in the park across the street, their talks stretching as the sun dipped below the horizon. He told her, in careful, measured words, about the weight of his family's legacy. He spoke of responsibility, of a role he had to assume to protect those who depended on him, a role that felt like a suit of armor he could never take off. He never used the word mafia, but he didn't need to. She understood the shape of the burden he carried. In turn, Ya shared her own history. She spoke of growing up surrounded by a big, loud, loving family, and how her art was her way of pushing back against all the harshness and sadness in the world. If I can make one person smile with a painting, she said, then I've done something important. Il-sung looked at her, this woman who fought darkness with color and light, and felt a profound sense of awe. His feelings for her began to reshape him from the inside out. At his office, a place usually filled with tense negotiations and hard decisions, he found himself pausing. He started asking different questions. Is this the only way? Can we find a solution that doesn't involve threats? His subordinates were confused at first, but then they noticed the change in him. The constant tension in his shoulders had eased. The cold fury that could flash in his eyes had been replaced by a more thoughtful, patient calm. He was slowly, deliberately building a new kind of strength, one worthy of her. One cool autumn evening, he walked her home after they had shared a simple dinner. The street was quiet, the only sound the rustle of dried leaves skittering across the pavement. They stopped under the soft glow of the lantern by her apartment door. The air between them was thick with unspoken words and a nervous, thrilling energy. The world seemed to have shrunk to this single point. He turned to face her, his hands shoved in his pockets to stop them from trembling. He looked at her, really looked at her, at the gentle curve of her lips, the intelligence in her eyes, the incredible strength housed in her delicate frame. Yeah, he began, his voice a low, husky whisper. All my life I have dealt in harsh things. Loud voices. Hard fists. He paused, gathering his courage. Being near you, it is the quietest and most powerful thing I have ever known. He slowly, so slowly pulled one hand from his pocket. He held it out, not to grab but to offer. Please, he whispered, the word a soft plea. Allow me to put the tip of my finger on your hand. I just want to feel that you are real. That this is real. Ya's breath hitched. Her heart was a wild drum against her ribs. She looked from his earnest, vulnerable face down to his outstretched hand. Without a word, she lifted her own hand and placed it, palm up, in the space between them. Il-sung's gaze never left hers as he brought his index finger down. The touch was feather-light, just the very tip of his finger making contact with the center of her palm. It was not a grab, not a hold, but a connection. A tiny, precise point of contact that sent a jolt of pure, warm lightning shooting up her arm, spreading through her chest, and flooding her entire body with a heat that was both comforting and exhilarating. It was a feeling more intense than any kiss she could have imagined. It was a promise. It was reverence. He didn't move. He let the sensation ripple between them, his eyes holding hers, communicating a depth of feeling words could never capture. In that single, gentle touch he was telling her everything. That he cherished her. That he was in awe of her. That he was hers. After a long, breathless moment, Ya curled her fingers, gently closing her hand around the tip of his finger, accepting the touch, accepting him. A single, happy tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. Il-sung used his other hand to gently wipe it away, his thumb stroking her skin with an infinite tenderness. No more words were needed. The quiet understanding that settled between them under the soft lantern light was louder than any declaration. The wall around his heart was gone, replaced by an open door, and she had just walked right in. The peace that Il-sung had found with Ya was not a secret he could keep forever. It was a light that shone too brightly, and in his old world, light was often seen as a weakness to be exploited. The threat came from a man named Kong, a relic from Il-sung's past who viewed his newfound gentleness not as strength, but as decay. Kong believed the old ways, fear and brute force, were the only true currencies of power. Seeing Il-sung shed them was an insult. And so, he set his sights on what he perceived as the source of this softening. Ya. It happened on a Tuesday. Ya was closing the gallery, humming a tune Il-sung had taught her, when two men entered just as she was about to lock the door. Their politeness was a thin veneer over a core of menace. They didn't touch her, but they stood too close. They spoke of Il-sung not with respect, but with a sneering familiarity. They mentioned the alley, the rain, the coat. They knew everything. A man like him doesn't get to have a pretty little distraction, one of them said, his voice a low growl. He has responsibilities. Tell him to remember that. They left as quickly as they came, leaving the gallery air cold and tainted with fear. Ya's hands trembled as she called Il-sung. She didn't want to be a problem, a burden. But when she told him what happened, the silence on the other end of the line was not one of annoyance, but of a terrifying, absolute calm. Lock the door. June is 2 minutes away. He will stay with you. "I will handle this," he said, his voice not raised, but carrying a finality that was more frightening than any shout. The old Il Sung would have handled it, with a swift and brutal demonstration of power. A raid. A public humiliation. A broken bone for every word spoken to Ya. But that man was gone. The new Il Sung, the one Ya had helped build, was smarter, more strategic. He understood that true victory wasn't in making Kang afraid, it was in making him irrelevant. Il Sung spent the entire night marshalling his new resources, not enforcers but accountants and lawyers. He used the vast intelligence network he once employed for intimidation to unearth every one of Kang's financial secrets, every shady deal, every hidden vulnerability. The next day, instead of a confrontation in a dark alley, Il Sung orchestrated a silent, bloodless coup. Kang arrived at his own headquarters to find his accounts frozen, his key business partners withdrawing after receiving anonymous, meticulously compiled dossiers on his operations, and his own lieutenants looking at him with newfound doubt. Il Sung didn't even appear in person. He sent a single simple message: "The world I protect now is built on different foundations. Touch what is mine again and I will not take your life. I will take everything that gives it meaning." It was a lesson in a new kind of power, one Kang could not comprehend or fight. The threat was neutralized not with fists, but with an undeniable, superior intellect. Il Sung had protected Ya by finally, completely, leaving his old self behind. A week later, the city seemed to sparkle with a renewed sense of safety. Il Sung asked Ya to meet him at the Gilded Brush after hours, telling her he had a surprise. When she arrived, the gallery was dark. Pushing the door open, she gasped. The entire space had been transformed. Every one of her paintings was still on the walls, but between them, covering every available surface, were massive arrangements of pure white flowers, lilies, orchids, and roses, their petals glowing in the soft light of dozens of flickering candles placed carefully on the floor. The air was thick with their sweet, clean fragrance. It was a cathedral dedicated to her art, to their love. And there, in the center of the room, stood Il Sung. He looked more at peace than she had ever seen him. He wasn't the intimidating boss or the hesitant suitor. He was just a man standing in a room full of light, waiting for the woman he loved. As she walked towards him, her heart felt too big for her chest. He took both of her hands in his thumbs stroking her knuckles. He led her to the very center of the room, surrounded by the evidence of her joy and his devotion. "Yeah," he began, his voice clear and steady. "You walked into my darkness and you didn't try to fight it. You just brought a light so bright that the shadows had nowhere left to hide." He dropped to one knee and Ya's hands flew to her mouth, a soft cry escaping her lips. He looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You taught me that true strength is about love, not fear. You are my peace. You are my home. Please allow me to love you forever. Will you do me the incredible honor of becoming my wife?" Tears streamed freely down Ya's face now, tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She looked at this beautiful, strong, gentle man who had fought his own demons to become worthy of her. There was only one answer in the entire universe. "Yes," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "Yes, Il Sung. 1,000 times yes." He slid a stunning, elegant ring onto her finger, then stood and gathered her into his arms, lifting her off the ground as he kissed her. It was not a kiss of desperate passion, but of profound promise. It was a seal on their future. The story of Il Sung and Ya did not end with a wedding, but with a new beginning. He successfully transitioned his entire organization into a legitimate global trading company, his sharp mind now focused on building empires of commerce, not fear. Ya's gallery became famous, her art celebrated for the very hope and happiness it represented. They bought a house with a big sunny studio for her and a quiet book-lined study for him. On a quiet evening many years later, they sat together on their comfortable sofa, the setting sun painting the room in shades of orange and gold. Ya's head rested contentedly on Il Sung's shoulder, his arm a permanent, warm weight around her. One of her paintings, the one of the sunflowers he had first admired, hung on the wall before them. The quiet between them was no longer the silence of loneliness he had once known, but the comfortable, peaceful quiet of two souls who had finally found their forever home in each other. They had faced the world and they had won not by conquering it, but by building a sanctuary within it, together. Did you fall in love with Il Sung and Ya's journey from a stormy alley to a sunlit forever? Their story is just one of many. If you crave more unique romances that explore the deepest connections of the heart, make sure to subscribe for more. New stories of love, courage, and forever are waiting to be told.